Well, it seems your colleague, Mr. Solokov, has made a remarkable recovery. He sent an email to Sir Gilbert this morning from Kazakhstan, and I had a phone call from Sir Gilbert himself. He wants to use my office for a meeting on Monday afternoon. Apparently, Solokov believes he's found the person behind Ekaterina. Welcome to Behind the Bottom Line. I'm James Schofield, the creator, voice artist and prompt engineer all in one for this podcast, which is based around stories that I originally wrote for different magazines and publishers. This is season 9 and we are now in episode 10 of a thriller set in the diamond industry called 7 Continents. So where have we got to? Kirill and Irina now know who has been posting the sinister messages on the 7 Continents website, and they also know the terrible reason why. But can they prove it? Back in London, Roy Marsden is not pleased with Kirill's colleague, Macey. Not only has she disobeyed his orders to stay away from Piet Hoodjink, she was also lying to him about Kirill. So, an uncomfortable episode this week for Macey, but things are about to get very much worse for somebody else. Chapter 19. Sergei's story. Some hours later, as they ate lunch, Kirill and Irina went over again what they had been told by Sergei Vasilyev. Sergei had worked in the mine for most of the 7 years of its operation as a computer specialist. He was on site during the week and went home at the weekend to his wife Anastasia, a school teacher, and their daughter Ekaterina. Life was good. They were both working and planned to build a house on land Sergei had inherited outside Dosk. Then came the accident. One spring, about a year before the mine closed, Sergei took a holiday and the family went camping around the oasis at the same time as the Kirkmen were there. Both Sergei and Anastasia were keen photographers, and the whole family was fascinated by the exotic customs and costumes. This was the second year that they had done this. Sergei could speak a little of their language, and the family was accepted by the nomads. Ekaterina, who was 11 by now, would play with the nomad children, chasing in and out of the water at the oasis, wandering in the hills, playing with the goats and catching rabbits, while the parents would help the tribespeople with cooking, milking the goats, making cheese, and so on. But this year, something wasn't quite right. They saw it first with the camels and the goats, who weren't drinking properly. Then one morning a young mother woke the whole encampment with her cries. Her small boy was ill. Sergei got the doctor from the mine to come down to check on him. She took one look at the child and called immediately for a helicopter to take him to hospital. By the time it had landed, the boy was dead. Now the family was scared, so Sergei drove Anastasia and Ekaterina home early. He didn't understand what had happened, but they would be safe back at Dosk. On Sunday he drove back to the mine to be ready for work on Monday. He saw that the Kirkmen had gone. Did the illness have anything to do with the mine? He couldn't believe it. The safety regulations were so strict, and so many. When he got there, he checked through all the logs used for recording any kind of incident at the mine. There was no record of any problems, and he would have decided there was no connection between the problems that the Kirkmen were having and the mine if it hadn't been for a chance discovery. The management had introduced a new cleaning system for the diamonds on the site itself. They were washed in acid to get rid of any impurities, such as pieces of soil or rock, before being shipped to India or Holland for cutting and polishing. The resulting poisonous waste liquid was then stored in large tanks on site, and once a month was collected by trucks and taken to Dosk to be disposed of safely. While walking through the site, he idly kicked a stone against the sides of one of them. The noise was strange. The record said the tank should be full. The noise said it was at least half empty. Sergei reported what he had found to his boss. Next day, a work team investigated the problem and found a leak in the tank. The day after that, a truck appeared, replaced the old tank, and took it away. That evening, the horror began. Sergei got a phone call from Anastasia. Ekaterina was ill. She was being sick and was passing blood in her urine. He set off straight away. By the time he reached Dosk, she was in hospital on a life support system as her organs, kidneys, liver, lungs, closed down one by one. Together with his wife, he sat and watched his daughter fall apart. She died after a week. The hospital autopsy was inconclusive. The doctors couldn't work out what had caused the collapse. The day after they buried Ekaterina, Anastasia, half mad with grief, drove into a tree. Sergei buried his wife next to his daughter. Suicide? Accident? He didn't know. The result was the same. He was all alone. Sergei went back to the mine and demanded an investigation of what had happened to the waste liquid that had leaked out of the tank. The results were unclear. Nobody could show if it had leaked into the oasis or not. Furthermore, the spring rains had washed away any evidence that might have existed. Sergei insisted that the government visit the Kirkmen and find out what had happened to them. But they had crossed over into a neighbouring country, and nobody could reach them. When he wouldn't stop asking questions, he was fired, and shortly afterwards, 7 Continents closed the mine and pulled out of the country completely. Sergei got a job at the university and carried on collecting evidence little by little. He wanted revenge, and one day he thought he had made an interesting contact. At a conference on the environment held at the university, one of the guest speakers promised to help him expose what 7 Continents had done. All he had to do was put together all the evidence. Sergei delivered the file, but nothing happened. Sergei pushed and asked and emailed, but all he got was excuses. The time wasn't right. More evidence was needed. He had to be aware of the bigger picture and so on. He stopped believing his contact would help. But then his luck changed, in a way. 7 Continents headquarters had decided to outsource the rebuilding of its website to the IT department of the university. They were well qualified, hungry for the business, and cheap. Sergei was involved in the project as a programmer, and he secretly built backdoors into the system. He could slip in and out of the 7 Continents website whenever he wanted, and nobody would ever know. He decided to try to cause maximum embarrassment for the company himself. He had put up the sinister messages and had started sending the objects to Villiers anonymously. I read somewhere that Tatiana Kerkomenova was married to Villiers. I remembered how Anastasia and I had taken Ekaterina to see her here in Doshk. It was a wonderful evening. We waited afterwards and got her autograph. She kissed Ekaterina and said how beautiful she was and how she wanted children. I sent Villiers the program and the other things. I wanted to remind him of what he had done, to let him know his actions had consequences. "Why did you choose Villiers?" asked Kirill. "Was he the boss of the mine?" No, of course not. This was 12 years ago. But he was on the way up, and now he's the company chairman with this big reputation for being environmentally friendly. It's all a fake. Companies don't care about the environment. They only care about the shareholders, and they only care about money. If children die to get more diamonds out of the ground, so be it. "Gilbert Villiers is different," said Irina loyally. "He cares about what the company does. It's not just window dressing." There was a silence, and everybody stared at the floor. "Listen, Sergei," said Kirill. "Come with me to London. I want you to meet Villiers and tell him what happened. It's not just you who was affected. It was the Kirkerman too. He'll want to help. I can set up a meeting. You bring this information you have or email it to me. Here's my card." Sergei looked at them as if he didn't know if he could trust them. "I've never been to England before," he said finally. "Give me a little time to think about it. I'll call you." They left him surrounded by the computer carcasses and drove to a restaurant near Irina's apartment. "Do you think he'll come?" Kirill asked Irina towards the end of their meal as they drank their coffee. "I'm not sure. It's a terrible story, don't you think? All those lives destroyed just to get something out of the ground that you can't even eat nor do anything useful with?" Kirill nodded slowly. "Yes, I suppose so. I hadn't thought of that. They are very beautiful, though. Wouldn't you like a diamond necklace?" "Yes, but not at that price. It's too expensive." "Why don't you come to England too?" Kirill suggested impulsively. "You haven't seen Tanya for a long time, or Catherine and Pavel." Irina thought for a moment. "Maybe I could. The students are revising for their exams at the moment. I have very little to do for the next few weeks. I'll think about it." "Good. Can I use your computer when we get home, Irina? I want to email Villiers and tell him that I think we have the solution to his problems. We need him to meet with Sergei, and I need to tell Macey too." They stood up to go. Kirill became aware that all the waiters were looking at Irina, and as he helped her on with her jacket, it suddenly occurred to him that it was because she was very attractive. He hadn't properly noticed it before. They stepped outside into the sunshine, and some pigeons flew up into the sky from the pavement outside. Kirill stopped and watched as they flew away. "What's the matter?" asked Irina. He looked at her. "If Sergei's never been to England, who slaughtered Tanya's chickens?" Chapter 20. The solution to Sergei. "You did what?" Roy Marsden was furious when he heard from Macey of her visit to Piet Hoodjink that morning. "You were given strict instructions by Sir Gilbert Villiers that you and your colleague were supposed to investigate the London offices of 7 Continents, not pick a fight with his biggest business rival. And I told you the other day that Hoodjink is a businessman. Not a very nice one, but definitely not somebody who is going to risk his entire reputation and his job putting up anonymous messages on a website." "Well, it rather depends, doesn't it?" answered Macey, "on what he stands to gain. If he can discredit Sir Gilbert with the UN so that Durban Diamonds wins this contract for mining in Antarctica, he might decide it's worth it. He must be up to something. How did he know about me working with Kirill Solokov, for example?" "Of course he's up to something. Sir Gilbert himself has suspected he has a mole inside 7 Continents. That's how he knows so much about what is going on. That's why he was supposed to be investigating his management team." Marsden got up from his desk and went over to the French windows. He went out onto the terrace and leant on the railing, looking over the roofs towards the Opera House. Macey joined him. The sun was setting behind them, and the view was spectacular. To the right she could see the London Iron Big Ben, while over to the left was the dome of St. Paul's Cathedral. She wondered what the rent was of the Eco-Warriors building. It had to be an extremely well-supported charity. "Have you heard from Mr. Solokov, by the way? Is he feeling better?" Marsden suddenly asked. Was there a trace of irony in his voice? Macey wasn't sure. "I haven't spoken to him today, but he should be back at work on Monday." There was a silence. Marsden took off his glasses and slowly cleaned them on a piece of cloth. "Have you had a look at your emails this morning, Macey?" "No, I came straight here from Durban Diamonds. Why?" "Well, it seems your colleague Mr. Solokov has made a remarkable recovery. He sent an email to Sir Gilbert this morning from Kazakhstan, and I had a phone call from Sir Gilbert himself. He wants to use my office for a meeting on Monday afternoon. Apparently Solokov believes he's found the person behind Ekaterina." Sergei Vasilyev carried his weekend shopping wearily up the stairs of the block of flats where he lived, on the 12th floor. The lift was out of order again. In the past this would have annoyed him, and he would have telephoned and bullied the building caretaker to get a repairman organised. But he found he couldn't be bothered to care any more about such things. He opened the door and stepped over the mess of old shoes and bags of rubbish that he should get rid of, but never did. After Anastasia and Ekaterina died, he had tried to keep things as clean as they had done, but it had been too much effort. Only drinking helped him to ignore the chaos his life had become. He cleared a corner on the table in the kitchen and put his shopping bag on it. Before his supper, he wanted to send an email to the friend of that pretty lecturer, Irina, who had visited him that morning. Sergei had decided that he wasn't going to fly to meet Villiers. He just couldn't face having to explain everything again. He didn't have the energy anymore. But he did want to tell Kirill who his contact was that had the information he had collected about the pollution from the Seven Continents diamond mine. Kirill could sort it out. Sergei found Kirill's card, wrote and sent him an email, and then wandered into the kitchen. He cut himself a piece of bread and sausage and slowly unscrewed the lid on the evening's bottle. Some hours later the doorbell rang. Sergei lifted his head from the table. He must have fallen asleep. Who would come round at this time? It was late. Oh yes, his landlady, of course, asking when he was going to pay the rent. Ha! He'd tell her she could forget about that until the lift was repaired. He turned the door handle. The sudden blow to his face broke his jaw and threw him across the room. He tasted blood in his mouth, and his eyes tried to focus on the two men, who walked calmly into his flat, quietly shutting the door behind them. They didn't say a word, but picked him up under his arms and dragged him across the living room towards the balcony. Sergei thought for an instant of struggling, but a sudden feeling of relief flooded his body when he realized that there would be no need to carry on any more without Anastasia and Ekaterina. As he tumbled through the air, he whispered their names like a prayer. It was finally over. Oh dear, I hope you had some tissues handy for poor Sergei. However, I hope this week's episode kept you on the edge of your seat. If it did, please tell your friends about this podcast, and please rate the story on Apple or Spotify. Or, better still, write a review on my website, www.behindthebottomline.com. Next week in episode 11, Kirill and Irina fly back to London, but a terrible suspicion is growing in their minds about who is behind the murder of Sergei and why. But they still have no real proof. Who can help them find it? If you'd like to buy the book or the ebook version of Seven Continents, you can do so by visiting my bookshop on my website, www.behindthebottomline.com, and there you can also find Peril in Venice, a thriller full of drugs, murder and adventure, set, of course, in Venice, and also a romantic comedy, Double Trouble. Nicholas and Timothy Aldridge, identical twins with very different lifestyles, change places and cause huge amounts of trouble before finding fortune and true love. So, until next week, take care and goodbye.